So we're speaking with Sinclair Davidson, our Adjunct Economics Fellow here at the Consumer Choice Center. He came all the way from Australia. We're here to talk good policy in the technological age. Sinclair, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So one thing that we've often discussed is that regulations exist. We've had this sort of dominant industrial society economy for a very long time. We're dealing with new technologies. We don't really have too much smart economic thinking about how regulations should be, could be, or shouldn't be in this kind of new digital age. I know you've thought about that, you've written about that, published about it. If you could give sort of a small synopsis of it, what are the basic challenges with regulation in this new digital age?
I think people don't fully appreciate how the digital age is changing the fundamentals of the economy. So we're actually moving from a world where big business was driven by cost considerations, so supply side issues, to a world where bigness has been driven by demand issues. So if you think of a big company, General Motors, it was big because it could produce millions of cars, it could drive down its average costs over time and what have you. And those bigness factors did create a regulatory environment where big government dealt with big business and big trade unions in order to regulate the economy. We are now moving into a world where if we think bigness, we are thinking Amazon. Amazon's bigness is driven by the fact that millions of consumers recognize that they can buy a good, cheap product that will be delivered to their house, sometimes even overnight. So that bigness is now a demand side consideration. But it's not a case of big government can now work with big business and big unions to regulate a digital economy, because in the digital economy we have consumers driving the system, we have gig workers, we have all these changes that are just not conducive for our existing regulatory environment. Now, regulation is supposed to be flexible and adjust to demands and what have you. But in actual fact, it simply is not. The economics of regulation is based on what we call the old structure, conduct, performance model. Now, this is an understanding of economics from the 1950s. This has been written into legislation, and if you look at antitrust organizations, they tend to be operated by lawyers who look at the act, as opposed to economists looking at the facts on the ground. Now, you can't always judge an antitrust regulator for getting things wrong because they've got a job to do. They are told, here's the act, you go out and do it. And very often, and quite reasonably, we say to people, well, the economy's changing, try and fit it into existing laws. But they're not fully appreciating the destructive creation of a brand new digital economy. So we have these out-of-touch laws that are being applied to bigness in ways which are totally inappropriate. And we're actually going to have to see some massive changes in thinking about what this bigness is, how it works, and how the digital economy is so much different from the industrial economy.
And picking up on that, because one thing that we often see is that we have novel technologies, we have cryptocurrencies, we have artificial intelligence, and there are frameworks that exist for creating new laws and coming up with new acts, new types of sort of guidance that we can give people. I think a lot of the arguments that we've made as consumer advocates is that most of the things that people are afraid of are already illegal. Fraud, deception, and those things can be applied. But sort of in your example, it's saying that they're trying to fit those old laws to bigness, and that actually is probably not doing consumers any benefit.
Not at all. When bigness has been driven by consumers as opposed to cost considerations, attacking that bigness for its own sake of being big actually harms consumers. It doesn't actually improve anybody's life. And as you say, fraud is already a problem, but I trust Steve Bezos to do more about fraud than I trust the government to do about fraud. And the same with currencies. I was giving a talk once, if you remember a few years ago, Facebook was putting out this currency called Libra. Mm-hmm. I was giving a talk to a conference sort of singing the praises of Libra. And people stood up and said to me, how can you trust the private sector? I said, well, how can you trust the government? So very often organizations like Facebook or Meta these days and Amazon and Netflix and all these people that people say, oh, it's just too big. They have become big because they are giving somebody something they want, very often at zero price. And that zero price also confuses people because they say, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. Well, it turns out that Mr. Zuckerberg doesn't know anything more about me than what I have voluntarily told him. So when you have a look at this, very often regulators say, oh, we want to see your algorithms. They've got no idea what those algorithms do or are or what have you. Very often these guys are lawyers. So they know how to spell algorithm. So the issue really is if you have a look at when people say, the value of the data, most of the value of the data has been added by Facebook. It's not me putting up my pictures of my holidays or wishing all my friends happy birthday and all this sort of nonsense. It is actually the value add from Facebook's side. So I'm not surprised that the data belongs to Facebook and doesn't belong to me.
All right, so I have one last question. It's a good point. A point you mentioned again is that too many lawyers involved. That seems to be a common theme. So the last question is related to some of the tech companies, and this is a constant argument, and we saw it in Australia with the sort of news media bargaining collective act, this kind of thing, to where everyone makes the argument, well, company X that's digital, Uber, Amazon, Google, Facebook, they're not paying taxes in this country, or they're taking away sort of content from newspaper publishers and the like, and there are bills that are introduced, there's kind of these collective bargaining agreements that are forced by the state. So is that something that is a prudent path, or is it something that will have very unintended consequences, or what do you think about that?
There's going to be a lot of unintended consequences, but we also have to recognize that a lot of bad policy comes from very often budget drivers. So I was speaking to the Victorian, so the state government of Victoria, Treasury people a few years ago, and the whole notion of Uber and, Tesla and driverless vehicles came up. Now it turns out the state of Victoria makes a lot of money from people speeding, running red lights, parking infringements and what have you. Now if we move into a world where we are going to have driverless vehicles, a vehicle will never speed again. A vehicle will never run a red light again. A vehicle will never be double parked or over parked or what have you. The number of vehicles on our roads will actually drop. So the revenue that they're making from all of these sources, the revenue they're making from registration, sales, or renewals every year, all of this revenue is actually going to dry up. So governments actually have a very strong financial incentive to keep us from adopting these revolutionary new technologies. So there's that, as well as the regulatory process is just too slow. And the argument that I make here very often is I found this great meme on the internet, of course, so it's obviously true. Obviously. And it was the Starship Enterprise, and hitched to that was an 18th century wagon. And the Starship Enterprise is the digital economy, and the wagon is our political processes. So our political processes are slow and unwieldy because they were a technological solution to high transport costs and high information costs 200 years ago. One of the great things about technology, it's lowered transportation costs, it's lowered information costs, and yet our political system is still using a 200-year-old technology, so obviously it can't keep up. It's not going to keep up. Real time in the crypto space is days. Real time in the political space is months, years, very often. So we have this complete mismatch between our political governance systems and our economic progress. And our political governance systems are genuinely keeping us back, and this cost is going to become more and more apparent. And if you look at the standard of living in Europe compared to the standard of living in the United States, you're starting to see this disparity coming into the system. And hopefully at some point, people are going to start saying, hang on, human flourishing, consumer choice, me and my family are more important than some ancient process that's actually holding me back.
Well, Sinclair, you're an amazing economist. I think you're a huge benefit for consumer choice and also Consumer Choice Center. So thank you for taking the time. This is great.
Thank you so much.